Good evening. Good to see everyone tonight. We certainly are blessed to have had you all invite us to come up here today, spend the day with you guys. It was great to get to spend some time at the Marshalls and get reacquainted with them. It's always good to be here. My family and I enjoy coming here. Of course, the kids love coming here and being with the Prager kids, and so it's been a good day, uplifting day for me, and I hope that some of the things that we have brought out have been uplifting and helpful to you as well. Tonight we're going to be looking at a lesson that's entitled "The Heavens Declare," and if you were reading along, you will see not only that we sang a song about that, but also the reading from Psalm 19. David says, "The heavens are telling of the glory of God." And we'll dig into that in just a moment. This is a really part 9 of a 9-series lesson. And so you kind of get the summary of what all of the lessons are about, but hopefully it will help. It's all about evidences and looking at God maybe from a different perspective than we normally do. If you look at Hebrews chapter 1, in the first couple of verses, it says, "God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world." And so one of the things that's interesting to me is that people will often say, maybe you've heard somebody say this, or maybe you've said this yourself, I wish that God would speak to us in some other way than the Bible, right? And I know from personal experience, I would much rather God just audibly tell me, "Hey, Tony, don't do that." And then I can move on and not do that. Or, "Hey, Tony, I need you to go to this place and I need you to do that." But that's not the way that God works in today's world. And we see that he speaks to us through his Son. But I want you to notice something about that, if you're still there. In these last days, he has spoken to us in his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. Many people believe that the Bible is the only way that God speaks to us. And I believe that Scripture tells us a different story. And so when you meet those people that say, "Oh, I wish that God would speak to us in some other way but the Bible," you can tell them he does. In fact, he's speaking very loudly, but oftentimes we won't listen. I don't know if I need to do something again, but I don't have control of this, Chuck. So Mark Hatfield did a lesson it's been several, maybe even years ago now, I don't know, but he was teaching a class, and he started talking about these verses, and he started talking about some evidences, and it really inspired me to dig a little bit deeper. And I'm really, truly amazed by those who can look around our world and say, you know what, we are so lucky. We are so lucky that all of these things come together. And we're here, and we're alive, and we can breathe and move, and we have all these things that we need that, statistics tell us shouldn't be able to happen. But yet here we are. They see the same evidence that we do, and hopefully we look at it as we talked about this morning, and we can say, "Thank you, Lord." Right? We can be a thanksgiver to God, knowing where all of these things come from. Let's go kind of back to August 20th of 1977. Now, I was born on July 4th of 1977, so I wasn't very old when Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 were sent out into space. But as these two satellites are traveling through space, on February 14th of 1990, on Valentine's Day of 1990, Voyager 1, about 3.7 billion miles away, mind you, near Neptune, turned around and kind of looked. I don't know if you've ever looked back where you came from, right? You're walking in the woods, or you're headed towards something, and you look back to maybe see, how far have I traveled? How far have I gotten? And so that's what Voyager 1 did. It turned around and it snapped a picture. And I want to show you that picture tonight. There it is. That's where you are right now. That's Earth from about 3.7 billion miles away, with a very high-tech camera, basically zooming in as far as it can zoom to get that picture of where you are right now. It's amazing, is it not? Sometimes it's amazing to me that people can look at a picture like that and see it so differently. A man by the name of Carl Sagan titled this picture "The Pale Blue Dot." And basically, Carl Sagan, as an atheist and a scientist, looks at this picture and he says, look how insignificant we are. Look how from that distance, how we just look like a dot in the sky, just like any other star that we're looking out into the night sky. And we say it's just a dot in the sky. And he sees that picture and it calls it a pale blue dot and says, look how insignificant we are. But that's not what I see. When I look at it, I see how amazing it is that God even thinks about me for a second. I look at that vast universe that he has created and ask the question, why did he create this vast universe if we are so small in it? And do you realize he created it for us? All of that. He created for us so that we would know that he is our God. And I think God said, you know what, surely my creation will look out at all of this and say, there is no way that there's not a God. And yet, creation does the exact opposite, doesn't it? Creation looks at this great big world and says, we're so lucky. We're so insignificant. But God in his design is actually trying to tell us how significant we are. I want you to notice in Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 18. I want you to notice a word here. I wholeheartedly believe, and they will never admit this, I wholeheartedly believe that in every atheist that lives in this world, there is something within them that wants to believe in God. They just won't admit what it is. And they try to fill that void with so many other things. And they try to ignore it as much as they can. And the reason that I say this is if you read these verses, notice what happens. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. I'll come back to that. Because that which is known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. See, men will often suppress the truth. See, suppress suggests that something is that they're actively doing something to keep it down. When we try to suppress something, we know that it's there, but we're trying to keep it down. We're trying to push it down. And that's what God says mankind will do. They will try to suppress the truth and unrighteousness, but he says on the day of judgment, they're going to be without excuse. The song that we sang just a few moments ago, "This is my Father's world." Notice the words of this song. This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears. Listen, if you listen, All nature sings, and around me rings the music of the spheres. Right? God is speaking to you. This is my Father's world. I rest me in the thought of rocks and trees and skies and seas. His hand, his wonders, or the wonders wrought. The birds their carols raise. The morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. God's creation is speaking to you. God's creation is screaming to you that He exists. And yet men will suppress the truth. God is the creator of this world, and we should take comfort in that fact. And so I want to reveal a little bit tonight about what God reveals about our planet, or what the Bible reveals about our planet. So I'm going to run you through an earth science class real quick. We're going to take 3 real quick science classes tonight. I am not a scientist, okay? So if you are, this is going to be the layman's version of a science class. So I'll apologize if you're saying, oh, the terminology, you just get, but listen to what God is trying to tell us. Our planet sits in what is called a habitable zone. A lot of people will call it what's the Goldilocks zone is the term that they'll use. Right? If our planet was any larger, the magnetic force would be too big and nothing could survive. Right? Everything would basically just be crushed. If it were much smaller, the magnetic shield wouldn't be big enough. And so too many things would be able to get through. The outer planets, the larger outer planets, work as a shield for our little pale blue dot. It protects us quite often from things that may otherwise come in and hit this earth. Now, there's a lot of things that need to happen to be able to have the world that we have today. Again, if we move just a little bit closer, it's going to be too hot. Right? And so water is not going to be able to exist. It just all ends up going up as gas. If you move us back too much, everything freezes. And again, we don't have liquid water to survive. And so we're in this place that seems like if there's a place in the world and somebody said, ooh, okay, it's got to be here. Okay, I better place it right here. I better put it right here, because if I put it anywhere else, no one would be able to survive. And that's exactly where we are. And again, to me, that's amazing. Now, at last count, there's about 20 things that need to happen to make a planet habitable for complex life in general. Not just humanity, but just making sure that we have enough for complex life in general. And for all 20 of those things to happen, to come about, the chances are about 1/100th of a trillionth of a percent that it comes together. Now, if you're not a math person, don't worry. I don't like math either. It's not a statistical improbability that this could come together. In fact, what mathematicians will tell you is it is a statistical impossibility for all of these things to come together. It's impossible. I have a friend who is a mathematician, basically. And he says you will find very few, not all of them believe the truth, but you will find very few mathematicians who do not believe in God. Why? Because there's no other alternative. There is no way to a mathematician who can do all the statistics, there is no way that it ends up being what we have if it's left to chance. It is impossible. In fact, what we would need for all of this to come together is about 1,000 more of what we currently have to even make it a statistical possibility. We already know that there's billions and billions of galaxies out there, right? So we need what we currently have and what we currently know times 1,000 to even make it a possibility that we could exist by chance. And it just doesn't add up. It's just not there. And again, I think that is God screaming to us that he exists. Job chapter 26 and verse 7. Again, we'll look at a couple of these verses. But notice what he says. He stretches out the north over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing. Now, in the 1500s, the brightest minds in the world, Aristotle, Ptolemy included in this, thought that the earth sat on the back of a large animal, an elephant, a turtle. The brightest mind, the smartest people on our planet, thought that the earth sat on the back of a large animal somewhere out in space. We know better. But God knew better in the days of Job. And if you look at Job in its chronological order, Job, by most accounts, lived about the time of Abraham. So, he may be one of the first book that was actually written, because if you remember, Genesis, which tells the story of the beginning of the world, was written by Moses. And God is telling Moses that story. So Job may be actually the first thing that's written down that we have in our Bible, even though chronologically it doesn't fit in our Bible that way. But think about that. Job knew it how long ago? That it wasn't sitting on the back of an animal, that it's from our eyes, it hangs on nothing. Now, we know a little bit about the science about it, right? And force and gravity and all those things. We know a little bit about the science of it. But to our eye, it hangs on nothing, which God told us long ago. And then in 1650, it was discovered that the earth hung on nothing. Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 7, and I'll go through these quickly because there's a lot to go through tonight. It says, all the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. Solomon, right? One of the wisest men ever to live. And I say one of because at least Jesus was probably wiser than Solomon. But Solomon was a wise person. And do you see how he's kind of explaining our water cycle? If you think about what we see, we say these rivers, right? These streams are flowing into these rivers are flowing into the oceans. Why aren't the oceans overflowing? Oh, because of our water cycle, right? It gets hot, water evaporates, it goes up into the sky, it gets cloudy. We say, oh no, we better get an umbrella. It's about to rain. Here comes the rain. It goes into the streams, into the river, into the ocean, does it all again, right? Solomon, thousands of years ago, said, yeah, this is how God does it. In Amos chapter 9 and verse 6, the one who builds his upper chambers in the heavens and has founded his vaulted dome over the earth, he who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the face of the earth, the Lord is his name. And yet our earth's water cycle was not discovered until the 1600s. Some very intelligent scientists said, hey, you know what happens? Here's why the oceans aren't filling up. And that was the question they were trying to answer. If we get all of this water, if this rain keeps coming and it keeps draining into our oceans, why are our oceans not overflowing? They're not filling up year after year. And so they did some research and they discovered, because water evaporates when it gets hot. So it goes up and then it becomes a cloud and then it rains and then it flows back into the ocean, and it does that over and over and over again. The 1600s, we finally figured that out. God knew long before that. In fact, Amos knew long before that. There are so many more things that could be spoken about. You know, the earth we know is round, and Isaiah 40 and verse 22 talks about the circle of the earth. In Psalms chapter 8 and verse 8, we read about the paths of the sea. and we discovered there are paths in the sea. We read about the first and second law of thermodynamics from Colossians chapter 1 and from Isaiah chapter 51. The first law of thermodynamics says energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be converted. Right? God created all things. Jesus created all things. He put us in a closed system where no new things are going to be created. We can change it, but nothing new is going to be created. That's the first law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics basically says things tend toward disorder. If you leave something alone, it tends toward disorder. Think about putting one of my boys in a room back there and shutting the door and saying, I'm not going to check on him. You think that the rooms are going to get more orderly? No, is the answer to the question. It is going to get much more disorderly. Even if you take that child out and you shut that door and you leave it for 10 years, is it going to become more orderly or is it going to become more disorderly? Things are going to begin to decay, right? That's the second law of thermodynamics. And Isaiah chapter 51 tells us that the earth is wearing out like a garment. It's not getting more complex. In fact, it is going the other way. It's wearing out. Let's move on to biology class for a few moments. There's quite a bit of evidence, as Romans chapter 1 tells us, that can be seen simply by what is made. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Basically, God says, just look at creation. Look within yourself. Do you realize that every time that you look in a mirror, God is speaking to you saying, I exist? Because you can see it within yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that we're arrogant to say every time I look in the mirror, I say, whoa, there's definitely a God, because wow, you look good. No, that's not it. But listen, I'm complex. You are complex. Even though we know certain things about our bodies and certain things about life, I couldn't create life in that way. Now, God gave us a way to create new life, but that's his design. I can't just lay my hand on the ground and create something. So every time we look in a mirror, we should be able to say, God exists. Just look at yourself. If somebody questions that God exists, we should tell them, look in a mirror and tell me there's not a God. Some may be able to tell a little quicker than others, but everybody should be able to see it. And look within yourself as well. In Leviticus chapter 17, and verse 11, as again, God is going through basically all of these rules and laws and regulations that we talked about for the children of Israel. He tells them that life is in the blood. He told them not to eat the animal with the blood still in it. That doesn't mean, you can't eat your rare steak that you like. There's no blood, even though it comes out red, it's not blood. But he tells them not to eat the animal with the blood still in it. Why? Because life is in that blood. And he did not want them partaking of it. Blood carries water and nourishment to every cell in your body. And do you realize that William Harvey discovered this in about 1616, how important blood was? That life is in the blood. And yet God told the children of Israel in Leviticus chapter 17 and verse, I know that says Deuteronomy, it's Leviticus chapter 17 and verse 11. What about the law of biogenesis? What's the definition of the law of biogenesis? It is the life can come only from life and that of its own kind. So I can take a cat, boy cat, and a girl cat, and that's another lesson for another day. But I need a boy cat and a girl cat, and I can give you more cats. But what I cannot give you is a dog or a squirrel or anything else. And it doesn't matter how many times I try, all I'm ever going to get is a cat when you combine a boy cat with a girl cat. If you put a boy cat and a boy cat in a room, you can leave it there for 100 years and you're going to have 2 dead cats. Again, another lesson for another day. Life comes from life. I can't take a dead boy cat and a dead girl cat and stick them in a room because they don't have life. So they're not going to be able to create life. That's why I shudder sometimes. I don't know if you've ever heard somebody use the expression about a child or a grandchild, and you say you express some concern. We might want to keep an eye on that. How are they doing? Is everything okay? And you'll hear them say they're sowing their wild oats. Right? That's what kids do. They sow their wild oats. The law of biogenesis will tell you, if you plant wild oats, what are you going to get? Yeah, you're going to get wild oats. You're not going to get an apple tree. You're not going to get an orange tree. You're going to get wild oats if you plant wild oats. And so when people say that, they say, oh, they're just sowing their wild oats, meaning, sometimes I don't know what they're meaning, but meaning, you know what, just let them figure it out. They're just figuring things out. No, what they're going to end up doing is you're going to receive wild oats. Life comes from life, and that only of its kind. Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, verse 11. Then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seeds, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind with seed in them, and it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. Basically, he said, when that seed from that apple tree gets planted, you are going to get an apple tree. You're not going to get corn. Okay, when you plant corn, you're going to get corn. You're not going to get an apple tree. God created that process. Again, if we look at verse 21, God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. Verse 25, God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And that includes mankind. We come and we can again, this is the last of a series of 9 lessons. But even science will now begin to admit that they believe that what we have today as humanity can be traced back to one man and one woman. Because before, they believed that different races and different ethnicities all evolved separately. And they started to realize the data does not bear that out, and they would never be able to prove that. And they all had to go back to one man and one woman. Well, that's brilliant, right? Didn't we already know that? From Genesis chapter 1 and basically verse 1. God knew what he was doing from the very beginning. Let's stretch outside of our world, our earth science, our own biology. And let's extend beyond earth for just a moment. Again, we talked about habitability zones. There is also a galactic habitability zone. Again, we look at this zone as it relates to our position to the sun. And we can't be really much closer. I can't remember exactly which one it is, but it's about 5% closer, I think, and we could go about 20% further away. But if we get any movement in there, right, it becomes either too hot or too cold. Well, there's also a galactic habitability zone. So if you look at our galaxy, our sun is about in this space right here. And again, basically, what you have here is a habitability zone in our galaxy. We can't get any closer than this, and we can't get further away. But even with inside of this, there are spots. I don't know if you can see kind of what looks like stars and all of the things that are there. It has to be in between a lot of, there's very few spaces. Even in this large area, there's very few spaces in here where we could actually exist. There's just a handful that they believe we could exist in other places that are very close to where we are already. It's not a coin flip. It's not 50-50. It is impossible for us to be here without God. Think about the stars in our sky. Now, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 41, Paul tells the Corinthians, there is one glory of the sun, and another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars. But then notice what he says. For stars differ from star in glory. Again, how does he know that all the way back then? Because if you look at it with the naked eye, basically they all look the same. Even several hundred years ago, everyone thought that all the stars were about the same size because they all looked the same in the sky. If you go out and just look up, you may say, well, that one's a little brighter, or that one's maybe a little dimmer, but they all look basically the same. But Paul understands, no, they are all vastly different in many cases. In Jeremiah chapter 33, this one was amazing to me. Jeremiah 33 and verse 22, as the hosts of heaven cannot be counted, and the sand of the sea cannot be measured, so I will multiply the descendants of David, my servant, and the Levites who minister to me. Rewind that in your head for a moment. And the host, as the host of heaven, speaking of the stars, cannot be counted, and the sand of the sea cannot be measured. Now, this was written over 2,000 years ago. And do you realize that there are only 4,500 stars that are visible to us? But yet we can only actually see about half of those because we can only see one side of the world at a time, right? The other ones that would be visible are during the daylight, we can't see them. So we can only see between 2,000 and 2,500 stars. Now, when you look up in the sky, it looks like a lot. But does it measure to the sands of the sea? Because I would suggest you could go to the beach and grab a handful of sand and have more than 4,500 grains of sand in your hand versus looking at the night sky. However, we now know and we now understand that there are comparable numbers of stars to sand in the sea. Not visible to the naked eye. In fact, if you think, you could probably say, you know what, in one night I could probably count to 2,000. Right? I could probably count those. So why is it that Jeremiah is comparing these two things that don't seem comparable? Well, it's because they are comparable. We just didn't realize it yet. It's estimated that there are about 20 billion trillion stars. That's a lot. Possibly even to outnumber grains of sand on the earth. And yet Jeremiah tells us that over 2,000 years ago, that they're comparable. In 1543, Nicholas Copernicus proposed a theory that the earth revolved around the sun, and it took about 100 years or so for it to become accepted. And again, this is probably the biggest stretch here. But in Luke chapter 17, verses 34 through 36, I tell you that on that night there will be two in one bed, one will be taken, the other will be left. There will be two women grinding in the same place, one will be taken, the other left. Two men will be in the field, one will be taken, and the other one will be left. In Luke chapter 17, it appears that as judgment is coming, some people are asleep, some people are awake working, and it appears he's saying there's going to be night for some people, it's going to be daytime for other people. Right? We don't know when he's coming, but it is going to be night for some people and day for other people. And we realize that again, we understand that how that happens is that the earth revolves around the sun, that we can have day and night at the same time. But yet we didn't discover it until thousands of years later. There's so much more that could be said. And honestly, if you think about one of the most amazing things that I guess our family has experienced as far as it relates to God's creation is a total solar eclipse. It was the most amazing thing. It was amazing to watch the cows in the field, the pasture by my sister's house where we were watching it, all started to go back home. They were like, well, apparently it's nighttime, so we all got to go back home. You start to hear crickets going, like all of the animals that God created. So, it's nighttime. And then that moon just perfectly fits over that sun. Why? Because the sun is about 400 times bigger than the moon, but yet the moon is about 400 times closer, and it works out to perfection. And do you realize that it is the only place in our known galaxy that has a total solar eclipse like that? So not only do we have this wonderful place, right, where we shouldn't be able to exist, but even our own scientists have said where we are in this world is the best place to view what's out there. It's amazing. Why did God do that? Why did God put us in that place? Well, let's go back to our context for tonight in Psalm 19. The heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Now notice the language that he uses. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. Just look out in the day, look out in the night, and God is talking to you. God is speaking to you. He is revealing knowledge to you. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their utterances to the end of the world. He says, even though they don't say anything, the knowledge that they bring goes out to all the earth. Their utterances to the end of the world. In them he has placed a tent for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of its chamber. It rejoices as a strong man to run its course. Its rising is from one end of the heaven, and its circuit to the other end of them. And there's nothing hidden from its heat. Now there's a change in tone, starting in verse 7. He tells you all about the glory of God. He tells you to look out at the stars, look within yourself. There's evidence everywhere that God exists. And because of that, he says the law of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true, they are righteous altogether. They are more desirable than gold, yes, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the drippings of the honeycomb. He says, because God exists, listen to what he says. a God that could create the universe in the way that we see it, in the way that we look at it, a God that powerful who can speak this world into existence, he said, you better listen to him and listen well, because he has a lot of things to say to you. He has a lot of things that he would like for you to do. They're not burdensome, but there are some things that he wants you to do. But what he gave us, as far as our creation, or the creation is concerned, is a way to look out and confirm that there is a God, so that we will do what he asks us to do. We will have the fear, we will have the respect that we need to have in God to do what he would have us to do. If you're here tonight and not a child of God, I would encourage you to become one tonight. Not, as we spoke about this morning, to not give glory to the creation, which is what evolution does. Evolution gives glory to the creation. They say, yes, this world is amazing, and it happened by chance. What great luck we have, right? And they may talk about the stars and the moon, and they may talk about the animals. They may talk about all of those things. But basically, that says creation is the hero in the story, right? What we have, what God has given us, is actually the hero, because there is no God. And that's what evolution is trying to do. They're trying to explain God without, or explain our creation without God. And you can't. He's got to be there. It doesn't work. So one of two things happen. And this is the only option. Either time is the hero in the story, and we had enough time, enough billions of years, and laws were broken. Right? The laws that we talked about, the law of biogenesis had to be broken. The first and second laws of thermodynamics had to be broken for our world to exist. So either those laws were broken once, never to be broken again, or someone outside of it, someone outside of time, someone outside of our own existence created it for us. Those are the only two options that we have. Either someone, something outside of time and space created our world, God, or there was enough time for the impossible to happen. Even though the statistics will bear it out that it is impossible, it doesn't matter how long you let it sit. Right? It doesn't matter how long you let that room sit. It will not get more orderly. You can come back in 10 billion years and look in that room, and it's going to be a mess. Things are going to be rotted, but there's not going to be new life because there was enough time. But those are our only two options that we have. Let's give credit where credit is due to our Creator, to our God. If you're here and not a child of God, there's time and opportunity to become one. I hope, if anything tonight, that you're able to have maybe a better respect for who God is and what he has done for us, what he has created for us. And all of the things that he's created are meant to be evidences of him, reminding us daily, hey, if there's this God that is this powerful, this wonderful, this great, I better serve that God. And if you're not serving him yet, you have time and opportunity to begin serving him tonight. We'll baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as we talked about this morning, for the forgiveness of your sins. If you're here tonight and you're a child of God who has fallen away, who's slipped, who's maybe forgotten maybe how powerful God is, and allowed some outside things to creep in, I would encourage you to make those things right with your God tonight. You have time and opportunity. We'd love to pray with you and for you. If you're here and subject to God's call in any way, please come have a front seat while we sing the song of invitation.